Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Shannon Susko, co-head of strategic situations and IR and head of healthcare at Edelman Smithfield, to discuss the EdelmanTrust Barometer Special Report, healthcare institutional investors. We're going to take a look at how investors are approaching the space. Shannon, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Hi, Jill. Thanks so much for having me today. Great to be here.
All right, you got it. And give us an overview of the special report and the methodology behind it.
Sure, thank you. So we're really excited to be able to share a little bit about our inaugural special report. This EdelmanTrust Barometer Special Report was a survey of 225 respondents. Those were investors across the US, the UK, and Canada who are currently invested in healthcare. Investment styles for this group of investors range from growth and value to industry specific and hedge, and assets under management ranged across the board from just below 1 billion to 1 billion and 10 billion, and then 10 million and above. So really a wide net of investors across many global markets to help support greater understanding of the role of trust in healthcare investment.
What were some of the key findings?
Absolutely. So, I think what was really telling for us and quite interesting is that while we were not surprised to hear this, the pandemic truly did accelerate an increase in healthcare allocation in the sector. Healthcare has traditionally been viewed as a strong investment and a strategic one, both in a good and down economy. But investors see this as likely to continue. And more specifically, we found that 78% of investors increased their healthcare allocation. And notably, 56% of them believe that the sector will produce higher returns now versus pre-pandemic. And 87% of them note that the pandemic highlighted the long-term value of investments in the sector. So clearly, there's been quite a tailwind for the healthcare sector from the pandemic, and the data really strongly supports the increased interest on the heels of this pandemic.
How significant are ESG considerations for healthcare investors?
Great question. I think we all recognize the importance of ESG, but in particular, this survey highlighted just how critical it is for healthcare companies to be mindful of their ESG mandate. More specifically, 73% of the investors we surveyed said they would not invest nor recommend an investment in a healthcare company that didn't have a sufficient ESG mandate. Now, while that number is impressive and surprising how high it is, we were even further surprised to see that 81% of companies with our investors believe that companies with a strong ESG program and good performance against that program deserve a premium valuation. And so, when we think about this, this is a really telling factor for many healthcare companies to consider the importance and the prioritization of their ESG mandate. Further, 76% of investors believe that companies who have strong ESG performance are actually more resilient in a crisis. So there's not only a benefit here to the premium, but an expectation of being better equipped and able to handle crisis situations that may arise. Key points for companies to think about as they evaluate their ESG program.
And innovation in the healthcare space certainly moved at a rapid pace during the pandemic. Are investors focused on innovation in general, or are there specific areas that they're going to?
Jill, that's an excellent question. I think everyone would have expected an increased focus and innovation on the heels of this pandemic, right? If we think about the fact that what would normally take 6 to 10 years to make a vaccine took 12 to 14 months. Not only is this impressive, but it galvanized a lot of support and attention on the importance of innovation in the sector. And in fact, I think there is something that we can learn from this, right? The survey showed us that 87% of investors think that the industry's response to the COVID-19 pandemic proves that the sector has the ability to innovate in speed. And this is obviously driving greater interest, right? And when we look a step lower beyond that, driving some of this positive financial outlook in technology and innovation are a couple key points I want to highlight. Specifically, advancements in treatment ranked very highly up there, tech advancement and innovation, and the application of machine learning and AI technologies were key drivers of interest, particularly as it relates to innovation in the space for investors. I think it also bears noting that 83% of investors expect the pandemic will continue to accelerate digital transformation in healthcare. So clearly, innovation in the space is a key area of interest for investors and one that they're continuing to watch and track very closely.
In the report, I read that healthcare companies are seen as having poor investor communications. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so certainly something that was interesting in particular for us to understand and unpack a little further. To your point, 68% of investors believe that healthcare companies have historically communicated very poorly to the street. 61% believe that they are unprepared to communicate effectively. And it also is worth noting that 78% of investors won't invest in a healthcare company that doesn't provide sufficient operational and performance information. This tells us that despite the increased interest in and focus on the sector on the heels of this pandemic, there's a clear opportunity for healthcare companies to improve their communications to investors. We know investors are reliant on several sources and channels to assess a company before investing and to seek information once they make an investment. And chief among them are the company's website, the investment portfolio, ESG and investor relations websites. But I think on balance, what we can learn from this data is how important it is to communicate clearly, consistently, and to leverage that multi-channel approach so that investors know and can rely on the information available when making a decision on whether or not to invest or recommend an investment in the sector.
Let's go back to the G, governance in ESG. I noticed the importance of the CEO and board composition for healthcare investors. Can you tell us more about that?
Of course. So we found that investors must actually trust the board nearly as much as the CEO when making an investment decision. More specifically, 82% of investors surveyed said they need to trust the company's board first, while 87% said they need to trust the CEO. It also merits mention that when building trust in a healthcare company, vision and leadership came a close second to financial performance. They came in at 69%. And a second only to financial performance at 75%. So clearly there needs to be trust in a company's CEO and board, but moreover, that articulation of the vision and the strategy behind the company as influenced and executed by the board and the leadership, specifically the CEO, are really central to driving credibility, trust, and investor conviction. This is an important learning, I think, that any healthcare company should bear in mind as they think about strategies for communication with both their CEO and their board.
Do investors expect the healthcare sector to continue growing post-pandemic?
Yes, in fact, amongst investors who increased their healthcare allocation, we found that 57% believe that the sector will continue to grow post-pandemic. And moreover, 56% believe that the sector will produce higher returns compared to pre-pandemic performance. And I think, as we spoke about earlier, the focus on innovation, the opportunities in the space, and the tailwinds of the pandemic are definitely driving that long-term growth conviction and keeping people both focused on and invested in the sector.
How can healthcare companies build and maintain trust with institutional investors, particularly in what's been a volatile market environment?
Of course, and certainly it has been, rather volatile. And so I think, one of the things we're most excited to be able to share about this inaugural survey are some of the insights and what those mean and how they translate to learnings for healthcare companies. We believe that there are important considerations that are coming out of this to help build trust. And while there is a slew of things we've learned from this, I'll just touch upon a few in particular. First and foremost, emphasizing stability and growth. We know from the data, but also just generally bearing in mind the importance of emphasizing performance, growth trajectory, and industry impact since the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, communicating those catalysts and those milestones and how you're continuing to drive progress and execution against them, especially in a down economy, is incredibly important. And companies need to prioritize that to increase trust and maintain trust from investors. Equally, clear articulation of vision, performance, and leadership. To your point earlier about the importance of the CEO and the board, showcasing leadership through earnings, but also operational updates and C-suite appointments and other things that help to drive visibility about, but also trust and conviction in the board and the C-suite are incredibly important things that I think often go overlooked by companies. Additionally, the ESG mandate. Again, we cannot underestimate the importance of ESG here. It's rather clear. Making sure you prioritize that mandate, but also your performance and reporting against the mandate is incredibly important. The quantified impact of your ESG efforts should be an ongoing and clearly articulated communication to the street. And that consistency of reporting is something obviously that investors are looking very closely at. And then finally, as I noted before, there's clearly a real opportunity for healthcare companies to better communicate to the street, leveraging multi-channel communications, making sure that the strategy and articulation of that strategy is clear so that investors have a reason to believe and maintain conviction in the investment in your company is very important.
Shannon, was there any investor feedback that surprised you out of the survey?
Great question. I think I was personally rather surprised by the feedback on ESG in particular. We know and have known for quite a while how important ESG is, but I was really surprised to hear that more than 3/4 of investors said their firm would not invest in a company without a sufficient ESG mandate. That's a pretty strong fact there, and certainly bears noting as companies, particularly those who are entering the public company space and others who are starting to grow their organization and scale and are just starting to think about ESG. The importance of that, whether you are an early stage company or a late stage company, is really one to factor into the account here. Because also, if 81% of investors believe that companies with strong ESG performance deserve a premium, then you absolutely should be considering and factoring all the appointments of your ESG mandate into your strategy. The other thing I was a little bit surprised to see, is that 84% of investors said that trust in a company is really important, and that they want to see healthcare companies having a positive impact on society before making investment. Now, this is a little broader than ESG, just a positive impact. But again, I think it shows the purpose and the areas of impact that a healthcare company can have in the space, considerations that they may not have been taken as fulsomely in the past.
It's interesting, Shannon. I picked up on that as well. It was the governance and the ESG that I saw that was highly stressed. So definitely aligned there. To wrap up, you mentioned this is an inaugural survey. What should we expect from the next report?
Thanks, Jill. Yes, well, we're thrilled to announce the results of our inaugural survey, and we're looking forward to going back into the market to survey healthcare institutional investors again in the coming months. Certainly the data from this was really interesting and compelling, and we're looking forward to see what the year-over-year stack looks like and what, if any, changes may have evolved with healthcare investors.
All right, and we look forward to covering it, Shannon. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.